Today we're talking about portrait photography with the Nikon system. We're going to go over some of the benefits, the drawbacks, a really great new app that I've been using, and a few of the custom settings that I changed to get the most out of my camera for my portrait work. For those of you that are new here, my name's Chris Tejas. I'm a photographer and videographer based in Ontario, Canada. I mainly shoot portraits. I do other work as well, but portraits is kind of my bread and butter, whether that's environmental portraits, whether that's things like weddings and stuff like that. It all comes down to taking photos of people. Now, to get one thing really clear, you can get great portraits with literally any system. It doesn't matter if you're using Nikon or Canon or Fuji. But what I want to talk about today are some of the key things that I've noticed with the Nikon system and how I am approaching things a little bit differently when I'm using my Nikon versus when I'm using Canon or Sony or Fuji or Lumix, any of the other brands that I've worked with. Looking at the benefits, we're going to start with hardware. And one of the best things about working with Nikon right now is that they pretty much have a current generation body for every price point. Going from the Z52 all the way up to the Z9, you have a great option for you no matter how much or how little you want to spend to get like the latest tech, the latest autofocus, all the best stuff out of the Nikon system. And that is like a world of difference from where they were just a couple of years ago. Like before the ZF came out, you had the Z8 or the Z9 in the current generation, which meant that you basically had two options that were very expensive. And then all of a sudden we saw like the ZF, we saw the Z6 III, we saw the Z50 Mark II, now the Z5 Mark II coming out. And it really opened up the lineup so that you can get into that current generation. Now you can definitely use the older generation cameras, of course, but when we're talking about the longevity of a system, we do want to talk about current generation models. And that being the case, you have something that you can use in any price point, and that's huge. On that idea of hardware, you also have a lot of great lenses with Nikon, like first-party lenses. You have the 24 to 85 covered with like multiple different options. In the 50 mil, I think you have 4 different 50 mils you could use. And then if you count the 58 mil knocked, you have 5, which is crazy. And I don't count that because who can afford that? But basically from 24 mil all the way up to 85, you do have at least 2 options in every category, whether that's an S-line lens or whether that is a more budget-friendly lens. You do have those, and that's nice because you can choose to spend a lot or you can choose to spend a little bit less. The only one that isn't more fleshed out is the 135. So there's the 135 Plena, which is an absolutely gorgeous lens, but obviously very, very expensive, and you don't really have anywhere you can go from there. You do have things like the zoom lenses, like that 70 to 180 is actually quite a nice lens. It's maybe a little soft, especially compared to some of the other higher end lenses that they make, but you just don't have a ton of options. The only one you really have is maybe that Viltrox 135 Lab, which is gorgeous and is actually very well priced. So that's one that I would look into. If you like this quick-paced, easy, fast, informative video, please let me know in the comments and do me a favor, subscribe. It does help. And the other thing that helps that not nearly enough people talk about is watching the video all the way through. If you like this, stick around for the ride. Have a cup of coffee, relax a little bit. You're here, I'm here. Let's be here together to the end of this video, which I promise won't be too long. Getting away from the hardware and looking at the files themselves, one thing I will say about Nikon is that I find that the way that it renders skin tones is very gorgeous. Whether you're using Capture One or Lightroom, which are the main ones I use, or programs like Aperty, which is another one that I'm going to be showing here that I've been using lately, I find that the rendition of skin tones is very, very nice. Whether that is a lighter skin person or a darker skin person, I just get good quality skin tones and I really appreciate that. Certainly nice skin tones is not like something that Nikon owns. You can get that with lots of other cameras, but I do find that anywhere in the lineup that I shoot with Nikon, I'm really liking the way the skin tones look right out of camera, which makes my job in editing faster and easier. And speaking of editing, Nikon files are just really lovely to edit. I find that they push and pull really, really well. They're very simple to work with. For the style of editing that I do, I just find that there's a lot of latitude, there's a lot of leeway in the edit, and I can overexpose or underexpose a little bit more than with some other systems and still get really, really nice quality things like skin tones and color reproduction and highlight roll off and stuff like that. Again, this is not only a Nikon thing. And a lot of people, I think, feel like this is sort of an oversaid thing about certain systems, like, oh, the skin tones are so good or the colors are so nice. And you have people on the other side saying like, you can do that with any system if you know how to edit. And both are true. And that's something that we have to be able to hold two truths that feel opposing but aren't. Because yes, you can get it all with editing, but the question is how much editing do you want to do? Does the file work with the way that you edit? And that's something that I've had to adjust. Like when I was shooting on Fuji, I had a certain way that I edited. When I was shooting on Lumix, same thing. Canon, Sony, Nikon, all of them, I edit a little bit differently and I adjust the files a little bit differently based on the color science that you get out of those cameras. It doesn't mean you can't do anything with any camera, but it means that matching cameras to your style of editing is easier with some than with others. And that's the sort of high level good stuff when it comes to Nikon, but what about some of the drawbacks? I would say there's sort of two drawbacks that come to mind right away. And the first one is having to do with the autofocus. Now, I think the autofocus is very good overall. What I will say is that sometimes it feels like the Nikon system finds faces where there aren't faces, like in like flowers and stuff like that. It'll find faces when I don't think there's a face there because it's a flower or it's a random object that doesn't have a face. I also find that it can be a little bit jumpy from time to time, like bouncing between faces a little bit more than I want it to, or getting really stuck on one face. And even if I change it back to another one, it will just jump back to that previous one. And I don't know why that is. There are some settings that I've changed that have helped to make that less of a problem. And I will say it's more of a problem in video than it is in photo. But it's still not a huge deal. It's just, these are like little nitpicky things because, to be honest, like mostly I find this a great system to work with. And the second drawback, or maybe criticism, or maybe just where we're at in the system right now, you can't find a higher megapixel sensor in a lower cost body. So something like the Z7 Mark II, for example, which is the previous generation, would be like a higher megapixel camera. And that would be a little bit more affordably priced than, say, the Z8 or the Z9, but it's an older camera. So we're still waiting to see if we get a Z7 Mark III at a lower price point so we can have that higher megapixel count in a camera that is more affordable for the masses. I think this is something that Fujifilm has done really well. They've taken that X-Trans 5 sensor, the 40 megapixel sensor, and they've put it in like tons of different bodies at different price points, which is awesome. So you can get a really high megapixel sensor very, very affordably. Now, do you need a higher megapixel camera for portrait photography? Yes and no. It depends who you ask and how you edit and all that kind of stuff. Personally, I like having a higher megapixel camera that I can then go in and I can, adjust files more easily. I can potentially like do more fine tuning on the portrait and stuff like that. But you also have more information, and with that comes, more information in like, people's wrinkles and their lines and their pores. So it comes down to how you edit. I like having that information and then being able to adjust it in post as needed. I do nearly all my editing in Lightroom and Photoshop, and recently I started testing out Aperty, which is essentially like a portrait-focused editing app. It has Lightroom integration, but also works as a standalone product. A lot of the things that I do normally in terms of like skin retouching, batch editing, light texturing are all done really quickly and really well with this program. I'm still learning the process of really getting to know the software, and I'll have more thoughts and a more thorough deep dive on it soon. But I wanted to mention it briefly here because we are, after all, talking about portraits, right? And Aperty has a pretty solid deal going on right now until the end of the month. So I just thought I would throw this out there in this video so that you could see it. Basically, here's the deal. It's a 7-day trial. You get 50% off an annual subscription plus an extra month free using my link. And you're gonna get an editorial gift pack that includes a reference guide for things like posing and a light textures pack, so you can add really interesting light textures. So if you're interested, check it out. Link is the first link down below. Let's get back to the video. Okay, so if you're using a Nikon for portraits, what settings would I recommend? I won't go over every little detail, but here's a few things that I use to get the most out of my Nikon, starting with autofocus settings. So if we go into my autofocus settings, you can see that I'm in autofocus continuous and I'm using the all area mode. That is generally speaking what I'm going to use. A couple of changes I make though for portraits is that firstly, I go down to here, and if I'm just shooting portraits, I will make sure that I am in this sort of people mode, meaning that it's not gonna look for cats or dogs or animals or birds or cars or planes or anything like that. It's just gonna look for people. I find that it gets less distracted that way by some of the things that can sometimes cause issue. Secondly, what I do is my AFL lock button on the ZF at least, I set to 3D tracking. So I go to the AF area mode and I set that to 3D tracking. That means that when I'm holding down this button, it will do 3D tracking on the box that I have selected, but it won't start it until I half press down the shutter, which is very, very helpful. So that's what I programmed the back button for. It's the same thing I do on my Z6 III with the AF on button. Basically, instead of using back button focusing, that's how I use that button. Okay, so next what we're going to do is go into our focus settings here. So if you go to the little pencil icon and then you go into A, and then we're gonna go down to this guy here. So focus tracking with lock on. If you go over to here, this is called block shot AF response, which basically this will help to make it a little stickier to stay onto a subject or to move away from it. I bring this up just a little bit to 4. This makes it just a little bit stickier so that I can make sure that I am actually focusing on the person I want to, and if somebody walks by, it's not going to as easily jump away from them. Lastly, what you're gonna do, go down to A8, limit AF area mode selection. I basically just turn off a few of the ones that I never use. So I have on pinpoint AF, single point AF, wide area, AF small and large, and then I have 3D tracking and auto area. I turned off a few of the ones I don't use, basically so that if I do want to cycle through my autofocus, it's just much faster. It's just, again, removing some of that friction, which is important when you have somebody standing in front of your camera, slowly getting more awkward. Next, when it comes to the display, so if you look at my display right now, I know it looks black, but if we cycle through, you can see that there's a few different options. This one has the most information. This one is more simplified. This is what I like to use. Having less information on there, only the stuff I really, really need, I find helpful. Sometimes I even just drop it down to basically nothing so that the only things I really see are when I half press down my shutter, I can see all of my exposure settings, and that's pretty much it. I find this to be the most helpful way to do things. Lastly, just quickly looking at metering. So if we look at my metering, I am using matrix metering most of the time. However, I do often use highlight weighted metering or a couple other options. What I like to do is actually use my record button here to cycle through all of my metering options. I just find it really fast and effective. The other thing you can do is just use your exposure compensation dial, and that'll basically do that for you. But a couple other things that I like to change when it comes to exposure. So if we go into our exposure here, there's a whole bunch of different options here. The biggest ones that I think are important to keep in mind is that this guy here, matrix metering face detection. What this will do is it says the camera adjusts exposure according to the brightness of any human face it detects. So it will prioritize faces. That's really important because blowing highlights on a face sucks. It's something you can fix in post, but it is a pain in the butt to do. So I like to keep this on, and that will just make sure that the metering is adjusting for the face. I don't do this all the time. This isn't something that I always keep on, but for portrait work, I find it really helpful. So that's a few of my images and a few of my thoughts surrounding the Nikon system for portrait photography. If you're somebody who's considering getting into Nikon and you do mainly portraits, I think you're gonna have a great time. Honestly, it is such a strong system right now and it's only getting better. I think it's a great time to invest because I think more and more people are gonna be shifting into this. It's gonna make it harder to get bodies. It's gonna make things more expensive. If they release a body everybody wants, that's gonna be tough to get. So get into the system now if you're considering it. I think it's gonna be great for you. Having said that, I have shot with Fuji, with Sony, with Panasonic, with Canon, with Olympus. I've shot with them all and I'm happy with them all. I think they all have something great to offer. So that's just, what I'm shooting on right now. So thanks so much. I'll talk to you soon. Peace.